for, but I'm trying to blow up and have a new career. Instagram, yeah, trying to have a new career, I'm tired of going to work every day. I need that passive revenue. Telling you, I don't have any like cool things to do, so none of the kids watch me. But, and I'll just hit record there. Good. So, welcome. But yeah, this is something. I'm a physician, orthopedic surgeon, and I kind of had a little midlife crisis a few years ago and was thinking about different things about my own path. And luckily for me, I've been talking to a lot of physicians in our hospital and in other hospitals in my area, but over time it evolved for regular people. So I go to different resorts and spas and just talk about this sort of topic. So I always start off by talking about, you can see that's an oyster with a pearl inside. So if you think of your pearl as kind of what makes you get up every day, what really motivates you and drives you to do whatever it is that you do. And if I took that, oyster and I put it on your lap and I said, hey, find your pearl, it'd be very easy, right? You just open the oyster, take the pearl out. But if I took that same oyster and I threw it into a swimming pool, now it's a little bit harder, right? Because you have to roll your pant legs up and do whatever and jump in, but you can probably still find it. Now, if I took it and I threw it into the bottom of the Pacific Ocean, as you can imagine, it'd be like really, really hard. So this is a very silly analogy, but as life goes on and your careers and families and all that stuff, it often gets really hard to figure out what your pearl is, right? Like who you are, what you're doing, why you do what you do. And when we think about three major things in our lives, getting married, having kids, and buying a home, we have a lot of resources to get to those areas, right? So if you guys have recently gotten married, there's all sorts of people and all sorts of things to help you get married, all sorts of things to help you have a child, to buy your first home. But once you're in those situations, you're kind of on your own, right? Like you buy your first house and your realtor gives you the keys and boom, there you go. So now all the trials and tribulations of that situation is really up to you. And there's a lot of other things in our lives like that, whether it be our personal and professional lives. We often get to some kind of level that we've attained, and then you just have to fend for yourself. So when you think about being happy and being successful, it doesn't always turn out the way you thought, right? So a lot of us, depending on the careers you have and the profession you have, you go through schooling and training and you put your head down, take it one day at a time, and boom, then you're done, right? And you assume that you get to some pinnacle and then it's all over. But we know that road is a lot different. So my particular road is, I don't know if any of you know, I went to the University of Virginia. That's our emblem there. And then I went to medical school in Philadelphia. I trained in orthopedic surgery at the University of Chicago, and I work at DuPont Children's Hospital. And I also trained at Jefferson. And now I'm an orthopedic surgeon. Ta-da, right? Like 20 years later, I've achieved the pinnacle, right? But as we know, when I started off, you can't really see that. That's me in like 1990 something when I was a kid in college. I had all these dreams and hopes and aspirations of being like this guy. That's not me, but I wanted to be cool and have a private jet and all that stuff. But obviously I'm just like a regular person, right? And what happiness and success looks like to you when you're younger often changes when you get older. And we know that it's not a direct road, right? It's not one step at a time and all of a sudden you're done. It has a lot of ups and downs and trials and tribulations and all the different things that life has to offer us. And, when you think of, this little curve about your happiness versus disappointment, it's basically what your reality is and how it relates to whatever your expectations were, right? So if you had really great expectations and your reality isn't as good as you thought it would be, then you tend to be a bit more disappointed. So when we think about barriers to happiness, I use this analogy of a gas tank. You wake up every day, you're full of energy, and then throughout the day, there's all these different things that kind of hit you in the face. So professionally, we all have things, sometimes you find decreased meaning in your work, right? Like you have what you think is the meaning of your work, but in actuality, oftentimes we find ourselves just making money for other people, and that can be very daunting. So a lot of work hours and workload, all the inefficient processes. Does anybody here work in a hospital? Used to. So if you've ever worked in a large hospital, especially an academic hospital, it's a very, very inefficient place. And I'm sure there's a lot of inefficiencies in lots of other walks of life and lots of paperwork. Well, now it's a lot of computerized stuff, but it's still busy work. Lack of autonomy and flexibility. So for me, I think of myself as a surgeon, and I'm doing all this great stuff in the hospital, but I have kids at home, and if my son comes up to me and says, "Hey, Dad, we're going on a field trip to the zoo in 2 weeks on Thursday at 10 o'clock in the morning," there's no way I can go to that, right? And here I am. I'm like doing this great stuff. I have a great career. I make a good living. But even just basic life things, like you often don't have the control to just do whatever you want to do because you often get shackled to whatever job or whatever career you may have. So that lack of autonomy and flexibility is a huge thing, specifically for physician burnout, but it's something that applies to other folks as well. A lot of regulations, that regulatory intrusiveness in different careers, in different industries. If your own cultures and your own values aren't really in alignment with your larger organization, that can be a bit of an issue. Moral distress, emails and meetings, just like the busy work and just things that you just have to do your job, but they may not necessarily be in alignment with what you want to do. And then other people, right? Think of all the issues you've had in your personal lives, your professional lives. They almost invariably involve somebody else, right? If you got real frustrated at work someday, or you had like a fight, or it's just an issue, it's sometimes with devices and processes, but almost always it's other people. And I'm a big fan of Seinfeld. I don't know if anybody likes Seinfeld, but Jerry Seinfeld said it the best. He can't stand people. They're the worst. And it's true. And then there's yourself, right? A lot of us are professional, neurotic, type A kind of people who kind of beat ourselves up, always striving for perfection, always trying to make ourselves better, always trying to do the right thing, which is fine. But sometimes there's a little bit of a slippery slope where you can be your own worst enemy. And then you flip over to the personal side of things. It's the same thing, right? For those of you that have kids, kids take up a lot of time and energy. If you have spouses and significant others, you have to give up a lot of energy for them. If you have other family members, pets you have to take care of, your dog doesn't walk itself, your cats don't feed itself. And it sounds very simple, but these are all things that throughout a day and throughout a lifetime can chip away at us. Obviously, if you have friends and chores and errands you have to do, and last but not least, like yourself as an individual. A lot of times I'm a divorced dad, and going through all of that, I was always thinking, like, am I being a good enough dad? Am I around enough? Am I being a good enough role model? Feeling guilty for breaking up our family and all that. And these are things that are very real things that weigh on you. We don't always talk about it. We don't always discuss it with people around us. But these are the kind of things that are very, very simple, but they can have a big impact on us and our happiness. And you think of a diagram like this, in order to really learn and grow, you have to traverse the comfort and fear zone, right? So a lot of us are creatures of habit. We like to do the things that we are good at, the things that we're comfortable doing. Somebody like me, like, I'm never trained to be a public speaker or doing speaking engagements or making YouTube videos. I'm just some nerdy guy that likes doing surgery, right? But in order to do something like this, I have to kind of step out of my comfort zone, and I have to do things that I may not like to do. And a lot of people, me included, for many years, we don't like to do that kind of stuff. But when you really think about it, depending on who you are and whatever situation you're in, if you really want to attain like your maximum potential, you're going to really have to overcome some fears and that discomfort. Frederick Herzberg is an American psychologist back in the 1950s who did studies in like Pittsburgh area, a lot of blue collar steel workers, basically figuring out what inspired and motivated people to do their jobs. And what he found was that the inspirational factors, or the things that are more intrinsic to the work itself, those are the things that directly correlate to job satisfaction. So if you think of achievement, how are you going to be recognized? The actual work, how are you going to get more responsibility and advance and grow in your position? Those are the things that lead to job satisfaction. When you think of motivational factors, those are external factors to the work. And these are the things we all tend to focus on, right? So company policies, who's going to supervise you, who are you going to work with, where are you going to work, where's your office going to be? And what he found was you obviously need those motivational factors, but not having those motivational factors was always an issue. But if you improve those motivational factors, it doesn't make you more satisfied at work. It just makes you less dissatisfied at work. And what that means is, like, just think of, I don't know if any of you are dissatisfied at work, but if you have a job and you hate it, you can't stand the work that you're doing, you can't stand the people that you work with, oftentimes, what do? You ask for more money, you ask for better hours, you ask for a nicer office, all things that aren't really part of the work itself. And if I give you twice as much money to go and do that same job that you don't like, you're now just going to be less likely to quit, right? You're going to keep showing up to collect all that money, but it doesn't necessarily make you more satisfied with the work that you're doing. And that's a very common thing. That's a lot of people. We all focus on these external things like salary, work conditions, but trying to shift gears and thinking more about the inspirational things, those intrinsic things to the work itself, can be very helpful. We switch gears to talk about money. As you can see, this is a little curve. You may have seen it somewhere when you talk about how happiness correlates with how much money that you make. Obviously, at some point lower on this curve, you do need a certain amount of money to survive and to buy your groceries and to pay your bills. But if you just keep making exponential amounts of money, it doesn't necessarily equate to exponential amounts of happiness. And it gets to a place where it kind of plateaus, where if you make, 200 grand and then tomorrow you make 400 grand, you're probably not necessarily going to be twice as happy. You'd probably be a little happier. You can buy more things, but it doesn't necessarily equate to that, even though that's what a lot of us focus on. Same thing goes for not just happiness in your salary, but also your fulfillment and how that correlates with how much money you spend, right? So a lot of people, myself included, right? I used to come to a place like this and spend a lot of money getting massages and doing all sorts of stuff, and it makes you happy. But eventually it gets to a point where it's actually just really extravagant and wasteful, but it doesn't really correlate to how fulfilled you're going to be. So when you talk about that and think of that, we touched on passive income. When you think of earned income and portfolio income, a lot of people, myself included, you get up and you go to work and you trade your time and your energy for money, right? And that's just the typical way. You get a job and you work a certain amount of hours and you get a salary, and that's great. But when you think about active versus passive income and these different metrics that we look at in terms of the growth potential, how long you can make money, the relationship you have with your money, unfortunately, if you stop working in an active situation, then your income stops theoretically. And you're typically financially dependent on your job. And the one thing that I really learned the hard way is that if you tend to make more money, you tend to have to trade your time and your energy to get that money. And then you don't have enough time to even enjoy all the money that you have. And that's kind of an issue, right? Because for me personally, I spent probably almost 20 years of my adult life to get to the position that I was in, to have my first job. And then I quickly realized that I had good things. I had a lot of means and I had a lot of resources, but I had like no time because I was always at the hospital because I had to trade my time and my energy for money. So shifting towards passive revenue can be something that, a lot of people don't necessarily think may apply to them, but it actually is a very common thing. And when you look at the other side of that, basically that's having true financial independence and not being shackled to your job and having a bit more time and energy to enjoy the money that you are making. So when we talk about alternative income streams, not having all your eggs in one basket. So if you have one primary mode of income, well, guess what? That's the only way you're going to make money. And if you don't like that, tough. So if you think about alternative things like investing and selling a product, creating a product, doing passion projects, those are all things that can help bolster however much money you have. But it's not necessary to make more money. It's just to diversify how you make your money so you don't necessarily have to rely on one particular primary income stream. So this is something that it's like a little Venn diagram, and I'll have you guys do that when we're done. We just have a few more slides. And it's really to find your purpose and your calling, right? So if you think of all the things that you love to do and all the things that you're great at, all the things that you could make money doing, and all the things that the world may need, you may just want to think, if one thing theoretically can satisfy all of that, that would be like your purpose or your calling in life. And I did it, and I'll share mine with you. And I only did 3 because I was being a little lazy. But I looked at all the things that I love to do, all the things that I'm great at, and all the things I could potentially make money doing. It's a lot of stuff to read, and you can read that on your own. But basically, if you kind of go through everything, what do you think is missing from up there? And I'll give you a hint. It's what I do for work. So when I was about 40, 41, I met with my life coach, sat me down. We went through all this stuff. I'm writing all this stuff. He's like, "Hey, Alfred, what's missing?" I was like, "Well, I mean, maybe I could be an architect. Maybe I could be blah, blah, blah." He's like, "Where's being like a physician or being a doctor?" And I was like blown away, right? I had literally spent maybe 18 years of my life training to get to where I was, and it didn't even make like this silly diagram. And that like blew me away. And I got a little emotional. I was like, not weeping. I was tearing up because, this was like my life's work, right? But when I really broke down who I was, it wasn't really anywhere on there. Um, and I didn't run out and quit. I stayed at my job, but I kind of framed things a little differently. So I kind of lumped things. I love being an innovator or pioneer. I'm good at it, I think. I love digital health and telemedicine, stuff like that. I always thought of myself being like a CMO of a startup. And it just so happened our hospital was like really getting into telemedicine at that time. This was like maybe before the pandemic, like 4 or 5 years ago. And, so I found, well, these are the kind of things that I like to do. I'm good at them. Let me just kind of focus a lot of my energy towards like the telemedicine stuff we were doing. So I kind of carved out about 20% of my time to do like a lot of telemedicine efforts. And on the flip side of that, I liked giving well-being lectures to some of our trainees. I liked being supportive and, motivating and inspiring other people. I always thought of myself as a problem solver. Always thought maybe I could be a chief wellness officer or something. So director of clinician well-being is the other title I have at our hospital. So like I said, I do a lot of these lectures and work with a lot of the other physicians. So it wasn't to say like, oh, being a physician didn't make the diagram, I should run out and quit. It was really about looking at things differently and reframing what I was already doing and how I could weave it into, my regular job. And, one of the big things that this also made me think of is, for us when we do surgery, I don't know if any of you have ever had surgery, the biggest moment for me is actually not doing the physical surgery. It's more of like in the recovery room when the patient's like waking up. I operate on kids, so mom and dad come in, kids waking up and blah, blah, blah. And the parent looks at me and they're like really thankful, and they're like, Dr. Atanda, thanks so much for taking care of little Sally or Jimmy or whoever. And that's like my pearl in a nutshell. Like that's really what gets me going. And I never realized that, right? So I was doing surgery and training and doing all this nonsense all these years. And I never realized that it actually wasn't surgery that was the thing. It was, how do I connect and bond with other human beings who are going through something that's like tough in their lives? And this put a lot of things in perspective. So now as I move forward, I can always kind of seek out those moments, right? I mean, obviously I still do my surgeries and still go to clinic and all that, but I try to find all those little moments because it's what kind of gets me going. This is something else. It doesn't show up very well. We're a little dark skinned. That's my family. 7 kids, my parents, African immigrants, like the typical rags to riches story. And I'm the youngest of everybody. And when you want to talk about something that motivates you, like, well, in my family, everything was about education. Everything was about, academic achievement and blah, blah, blah. And that was the second part for me. So the first part was like really figuring how I connect and bond with people. One of the big things for me was just how do I make my family proud, and I wanted what my parents sacrificed and went through to come to this country. I wanted it to mean something. So when I was younger, that was like literally all I could think of. Obviously, I liked medicine and science and all that, but that was like a big, big motivator and inspirator for me. So again, these are the things that we know, but we don't necessarily think about them. We don't articulate them and share them with other people. But as you kind of dig deep a little bit on this exercise, you can think about what your pearls are. Second part of that, these are my kids. They don't show up very well here. They're 12 and they're 9, and they give me a run for my money, but every day I wake up, I try to make them proud of me, So when they're my age and they look back at, what their childhoods were like and what their dad did for them, hopefully it'll mean something to them. So we'll kind of finish up here. So permission slips, this is something that Brene Brown talks a lot about. She's a big social worker. She's a huge YouTube and Netflix presence. So I stole a lot of these from her. So being honest about your true purpose and really figuring that out. We all have permission to do that and should do that. We should be kind and compassionate to ourselves. Again, we can be our own worst enemies sometimes and beating ourselves up and striving for perfection. Big thing about being your own person, as you know, in this day and age with social media and Instagram and Facebook, everybody's kind of comparing their lives to everybody else. But we really want to try to focus on, who we are and having these tough conversations and being able to communicate appropriately with those around us, our coworkers, and obviously our loved ones. And letting your true self be seen. Again, with social media, it's so easy to put a version of ourselves out to the world that we want them to see or we think people should see, as opposed to really, being, true to ourselves and just really seeking inspiration, those intrinsic factors and not motivation. And, when you figure out whatever your true purpose is, I always say that, there are 3 kind of main reasons why we do what we do. One of the big things is the reasons we tell other people why we do what we do. Secondly, it's what we tell ourselves why we do what we do. But lastly, it's the actual reasons why we do what we do. And that's what we kind of want to focus on as we move forward and really get to the bottom of. So um, I'm done rambling on. I have some Post-its back there and some markers if you want. If you're not too bored, you can take 5 or 10 minutes and make your own diagram. Feel free to share it with each other. You can share it with me or talk about it. Um, but that's really all I had for you. So thanks for sticking around. Hopefully that was useful. Hopefully this was recording. Yeah. See if I can use this little